Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm Kirsty.
And this is our podcast covering the highs, lows and realities of parenting a child with neurodiversity.
Each week we'll be sharing updates from our lives and hearing from a variety of guests about their advice and experiences.
This is Love Needs No Words. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Love Needs No Words. Today we're joined by Joanne Watson. Joanne's son is 26, his name's Tom. He's diagnosed autistic and is non-speaking, but uses the method of spelling to communicate. Joanne has been working with this method and those involved with the concept of spelling for many years and joins us now. Jo, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I should also say thank you for doing what you do, because when Tom was a young, freshly diagnosed, I would have loved to be able to access something like this. So I think you're doing a really great thing for the community.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. So first of all, could you tell us a bit more about Tom? And I guess what were the signs for you that he may have had autism, and when he was diagnosed as well?
So Tom's infancy went kind of normal. He's got a lovely sister who's 18 months older than him, and he kind of followed that pattern. And I didn't notice anything different about Tom until about 8 months, and then I'd say a couple of things started cropping up. But we were in the middle of a lot of international moves, and so I guess my focus and attention might not have been completely on it. But by the time we moved to Belgium, just after Tom was just after he was 1 year old, and by the time we'd settled in, I kind of then really started to notice some changes in him. And I guess I liken it actually to putting him in a dinghy and he's going out to sea, and at some point I can't get the dinghy back and he just drifts further and further away from me. And that's the kind of the way it went with Tom after his sort of first birthday. But I am lucky enough to have a wonderful friend who's also a speech therapist. And I remember calling her one evening and saying, just giving her my concerns and everything. And she said, well, listen, Jo, use the bubble technique and see how that goes, because Tom is going to love the bubbles. He's only a little toddler, right? He's going to love the bubbles. And if he wants to see more bubbles, he's going to look you in the eyes to get more bubbles, because he couldn't speak at this point. So sure enough, I blew the bubbles, and Tom was really excited and he desperately wanted more bubbles, but he wasn't looking at me. So I was like, okay, so I need to do something here. And the other thing, he wasn't listening to me, but he could hear Teletubbies from 2 rooms away. So, and he'd run off to find Teletubbies. So I thought, right, okay. And I was also lucky enough to have a good doctor, and she looked after the sort of Kinder and Gesehen, which are the babies and toddlers in all the local villages. So she was very kind of savvy about spotting the signs. And she sent Tom off for a BERA hearing test, where they put him under general anesthetic and test his hearing. And that came back as perfect hearing. And because it did, that set a battery of tests for Tom. So the speech therapist, the psychologist, the OT, you know how it goes. And then eventually it came back as, well, he was only about 2 years old at the time, actually. He was very young. So it was a very good system there. They said, we can't officially diagnose him at this stage, but it's clear to us that he has autism and a severe language delay. And that actually did fix as a diagnosis later on. He was young, and the outlook back then, 25 years ago, in Belgium at least, was pretty bleak. So I did a lot of my own research, which is why I would have been really pleased to have a podcast like you guys to listen to as well. So.
You mentioned the Teletubbies, running to the Teletubbies, and it's something that we hear quite a lot on this podcast, that someone will say, oh, but their favourite TV show was on in the other room and they ran to it, so I knew they could hear.
Yes,
so it's quite a good technique to use, to be like, well, if they're not giving you eye contact and you feel like you're saying their name and they're not responding, but they will respond to their favourite TV show, there's obviously more going on there.
Definitely. And I think to start with, of course, if you're not necessarily familiar with those ideas, you just think, oh, they're just ignoring me and that kind of thing. So it's kind of useful to know that those can be key, that point you in a direction anyway of getting support and further help. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was it like? You talked briefly about it there, about how you didn't have a podcast or much information. You've also got the added part about the fact you're not, you're living in Belgium, you're living in a different country. So what was that like for you as a family, getting that diagnosis?
I suppose it's a little lonely to start with because you don't have your family and your very close friends near you. So it's quite tough, but it also makes you a little bit stronger
Hmm.
because you are isolated. And I think one of the key things that it did for us, because we were in a Flemish and a French speaking community, and I thought that's not going to help Thomas at all, having
Yes.
something in a different language, that I ended up retraining to homeschool Tom and put him through that program because I wasn't in a system that I was carried along with. I had to make my own system. So, yeah, so that's how it probably changed the way we did things with Tom.
And what did the next sort of few years look like for Tom?
Well, we homeschooled for a couple of years until he got to about year one, and he went into year one a year older than he was. And then when he got to sort of middle school, because he went into an American system, secondary age, yeah, well, actually middle school age, we moved him to the International School of Brussels, which had and that was a full-time program for him. They had a special unit within their mainstream school, and that was a really good school for him. And then we moved back to the UK when he was 11.
And was
Then
he
he
still non-speaking at that point, Joe, or had his speech come on?
Absolutely. We got by with minimal speech, needs and wants until he was the age of 23. So yeah, he was a non-speaker until the age of 23. Well, he still is a non-speaker, but now he can communicate. So
So Tom now uses the method of spelling to communicate. What is that, and how did he get involved in spelling in the first place?
um what is spelling to communicate? Spelling to communicate is making a connection between the mind's intent and the body's action, because speech is some of the finest motor movements in our body. And in spelling to communicate, we take this communication away from that fine motor movement and we put it into the easier gross motor movement of the shoulder and the arm. And we teach pointing to letters on increasingly complex letterboards to eventually a keyboard. And ultimately, through this training, it becomes a vehicle for non-speakers to be able to express their thoughts and ideas. So that's the very basics of what spelling to communicate is. I got involved in this, it was about the second lockdown, I think. So it wasn't that long ago when you think about it in Tom's overall life. But I came across a book called Underestimated by a father and son called JB and Jamie Handley. And I picked up this book and I thought, this is interesting, because I had read some books by this father before. So I had a lot of respect for him. And I knew he had a non-speaking son who was slightly older than Tom. So I thought, how did he co-write this book? Got to read this. And I picked it up and it really followed our journey of trying everything, traveling everywhere to find the solutions to support Tom's education. And then they came across spelling, and obviously the journey of spelling was detailed in this book. And I thought, oh gosh, I like the sound of this. And then I saw them being interviewed on an American news channel that I watch, and the son Jamie, he looks like Tom and he sounds like Tom, which is very autistic. And I thought, so why can't this be Tom? I've got to give this a go. So I literally hunted down the founder of Spelling to Communicate, an amazing lady called Elizabeth Vossler, and spoke to her on Zoom a couple of times. And she put me in touch with one of her practitioners, because there were no practitioners in the UK at this time. She was a lovely practitioner and she was absolutely super at her job. but I'd had an awful lot of training. And so I struggled a little bit with the concepts of where spelling to communicate was coming from, and namely presuming competence, which I'll come on to. So I struggled with Tom. We went through the motions, but I wasn't really quite getting it with him, and he was getting cross with me. And, I was trying to listen to my practitioner, but also ignoring some of the things that she was saying. So I wasted 2 years, basically. I didn't waste them. We did a lot of work together. But for various reasons, I then sort of stopped using spelling a little bit, and because it was just difficult. But luckily fate intervened, because there were a number of people who were interested in spelling at the time, and Elizabeth Vossler, we call her Evie for short, came to the UK on a bit of an outreach. So I booked in for Tom to have 6 sessions, the maximum sessions with her. I thought, well, if Tom can spell with Evie, I'm all in. If he can't, maybe this isn't for us, kind of thing. So we went along, and it was a fascinating few days. Well, that's an understatement, actually. But within the first couple of sessions with Tom, she had him spelling things on the board, which I thought that he'd never spelt with me before, answering questions. And I was just like, whoa, this is really different. Certainly by the second or third session, she had him answering questions where he was actually communicating his own thoughts, feelings, and opinions on subject matters that were complex. These lessons that she was reading out to him were complex. It was a very tearful few days, because you can't unsee what you see. And we were seeing that our son was in there. He didn't have an intellectual disability. He didn't have language delay. He was an extremely intelligent, funny, amazing young man. And this is the first time we've heard his authentic voice at the age of 23. So we had a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And we didn't speak to anybody for a week, because it took us quite a long time to get our heads around it. But we left that 2 days with Evie very different people. For a start, we presumed competence. We knew our son was in there, and so we started treating him like an age-appropriate person, which is the way Evie treated him from the moment she met him. She completely ignored any kind of extra body movements and extra sounds and that kind of thing, and she just carried on talking to him, because as far as she was concerned, he was listening, and that was fine. And that's the way it works. Could Thomas have spelled at that level with Evie had he never seen the boards before? He absolutely could not have done. And it was of some comfort to me that whilst I hadn't been able to take him to that level, I had been motor coaching his body on those boards. So that when someone with Evie's level of skill and experience came along, he was able to access that level of communication. So yeah. So that's how we got involved.
You speak about the emotions that it obviously brought up for you as parent. What did it bring up for Tom?
Yeah.
It's hard to put into words what it brought up for everybody. I think it was a bit of a journey for Tom, because he'd seen the book Underestimated that I read was converted into a movie that's available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. And he'd seen that. So he could see ultimately what using those boards was going to enable him to do. It was going to enable him to prove to his family and everybody else that he was in there and that he's intelligent, and it's his body that's failing him, not his brain. And so then to listen to me and Kevin, my husband, talk about potentially giving this up, maybe it's too difficult, maybe it's not for Tom, must have been really difficult for him. And he knew, and he has admitted this on the boards, he knew it was the last chance, like getting to Evie, because he'd heard us say it, God forbid, he knew this was his last opportunity. So it was big for him. And I think to be able to then express himself on the boards with Evie was just phenomenal for him, because he was like, okay, they know now. They know. then I'm in here. So yeah.
I'm trying not to cry over here because I've obviously got a son with limited speech, but having to wait that long, to hear him speak, and then to hear him, speak in his own way so eloquently and answering questions that, you said you didn't actually think he'd be able to answer. It did make me laugh though, because I thought, is it a case of doing homework with your mum and you don't want to do it as well as you're doing
Well,
it
I
with
can
the
tell.
teacher?
I can tell you, being a practitioner as well, the relationship between mother and sons is different on the boards
Yeah.
and takes some.
Yeah, I
It's a
bet.
bit different, yeah.
Yeah.
But you
Reminds
get
me of
there.
Motherland. I don't know if you've
Yes,
seen
that's what
Motherland
I
when
was
she's
thinking.
trying to teach her children maths. It's like, "Whoa!" It's just a different
Exactly.
dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah,
There's
give
a
them
bit to
someone
get
else.
over.
Yeah.
There's a little bit to get over in that respect, but everybody's got the motivation to do it right.
Yeah, and I guess it's a bit more emotionally weighted if you're the parent as well. You know,
Yeah.
you are fully invested in that process, aren't you?
Totally.
And you so want it to work. You so want to unlock that for your child.
You absolutely do. So what you've got to be careful of is that you don't put that emotion onto
Yeah.
your child when you're as his communication and regulation partner. But yeah, so
We even find it now, Joe, and I spoke about it to you briefly before, is that the words are coming and your expectation is that it's just, they're going to come even faster and you're going to hear lots of different things, but it's not always that way, because it's hard enough for them to say the smallest amount of things. That it is a marathon, not a sprint. And you're right, it's about giving them that time and that space, and not making them feel under any form of pressure.
yeah, it's hard. Using speech is very hard. We
Yeah.
take a lot for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about these boards then. So were you sent a board to work with Tom with, and what do they look like?
What do they look like? So the starting point of it is that you work with large boards, supporting the speller to get to those larger letters. And when they've mastered getting to those larger letters, you then move to what we call a 26 letter board, and that's with all of the alphabet on one board. And that's a significant step up in terms of motor ability. But once they've mastered this level of board, they go to what we call a laminate, which is basically a laminated sheet of card with the letters, but it
Okay.
also has the backspace and some grammar, and you can switch it over to a number board as well. And when you've mastered that, you can then go on to the keyboard, which is once again a much more complex set of motor skills required for that. So yeah, that is the sort of the grades, but you have to master certain skills before you can go to the next level. And 26 letters, we say, equals infinite possibilities, because there's nothing you can't spell without 26 letters in front of you.
What an amazing way to unlock how they're feeling and their emotions and their thoughts about so many different things, when, like you say, you tried so many methods that just didn't work. Is Tom at that 26 board level now? What level is Tom at?
So Tom, when he's out and about, we just pack a laminate, and that goes in the backpack, and that's what he uses. But if he's working on any sort of more detailed work or more complex work, he uses a keyboard now, and the keyboard goes up onto the iPad, and then he can make that speak with the iPad speak function for him. So yeah.
And is it pointing to each different letter? Is that how it works, to spell out each word?
We take it from the complex fine motor of speech, and we put it into the easier gross motor of the arm. And we coach and teach pointing to each individual letter. And so basically improve the motor skills needed for them to point to the letters on the letterboards, ultimately ending into their sort of open communication. And the reason it is so effective is because we do take it out of the fine motor and we put it into the gross motor. Because historically and traditionally, education has always been about taking a sort of a cognitive approach first, and assuming that non-speakers may have some form of intellectual disability. And with that, they bring in sort of that behavior component, as you know, someone's trying to avoid something, or there's a lack of motivation, and so we have to appeal to our non-speakers via, you know, a behavioral approach. But it's it's really not about that for our non-speakers, because it's not a question of I don't want to or I don't understand. It's a question of I can't make my body do it. And that's because, without going down a sort of a neurology rabbit hole, language is actually 100% cognitive, and communication is 100% motor. And having speech or not is not a sign of your intelligence. And if you kind of want to express the language that's in your head, you have to use the motor cortex area of your brain. And that's the part that's scrambled for our non-speakers, scrambled for want of a better word. Non-speakers have coined the phrase actually brain-body disconnect, and I think it's a perfect way of describing it. And what they're saying is, by using the brain-body disconnect, is that what my brain is thinking and what my body is doing can be two entirely different things. And so if you think about it, our non-speakers are at an immediate disadvantage, because if they have 100% cognitive function and language going on in their head, they need to express it.
Yeah.
But to express it requires communication, and that's 100% motor. To speak it, to sign it, to touch, to text, to type, to write, to point, to touch, everything requires motor. And it's quite interesting that every test of intelligence also requires you to deliver a motor skill, to write, to point, to speak. You will find it very difficult to name any form of intelligence test that doesn't require a form of motor communication. But if motor is your issue, you're never going to be able to pass an intelligence test. And so that's really why S2C is so effective, because we focus on that motor, and we focus on, you know, putting the emphasis into the gross motor and pointing to letters on those letterboards. And ultimately that leads to meaningful communication, not just needs and wants, but proper thoughts, feelings and opinions. And that's quite life-changing.
Yeah, the frustration somebody must feel not being able to get across what they've got, what they're feeling, what they're thinking.
Oh,
Must be
huge.
incredible. Was there a huge change in Tom after his ability to be able to get those things across to you? And
Yeah, there
yeah,
and I think the huge change came around a massive reduction in anxiety. And because a lot of our non-speakers, particularly our autistic non-speakers, have a huge amount of anxiety, which you can only imagine, can't you, if you're
yeah,
perfectly there and you're trapped in a body that won't behave,
yeah,
and you can't communicate anything, and then your body's doing these random things that just reinforce people's belief that you're not in there.
yeah,
It is very anxious. And of course, they have very sensitive systems as well, have a lot of sensory needs which are not understood and diagnosed. That there is so there's so much anxiety with these guys. And that was the first thing we noticed with Tom, was the reduction in anxiety, because we were able to talk to him normally as well. And I think that made a difference, because we weren't dumbing down our language. We were just talking normally, because we knew he could understand it. And even if he was looking in different directions, and if his body was doing different things, we knew that he was listening. And so we could just communicate normally with him and involve him in decisions, because he could be involved in decisions. He was now a fully functioning member of our family. He just couldn't speak. And that makes such a difference. And so slowly we started to learn more and more from Tom. And of course, that helps all of those difficult situations you find yourself in as parents, right?
Yeah.
With non-speakers, we're like we're like Sherlock Holmes, aren't we? We've got to try and understand why that happened. You know, where did you get that injury? How did that happen? Why are you behaving like this way? You've got to try and work it all out, right? But when you have communication in the form of spelling, where you have an access to understand where it's all coming from, and then you can support them better, and then that reduces anxiety more. So yeah, it is a great circle in that respect.
Yeah, it
So,
must have been life-changing for Tom. And what was the impact on the sort of relationship between him and his sister as well?
well, they've always had a kind of quite unique and special bond, the two of them. But I think this takes it to a different level, because Emily never, his sister, never kind of thought that she would be able to have any form of relationship with Tom other than the basic sort of bonds of being siblings. And yeah, last year Emily and her fiance Martin took Tom to Amsterdam together, and this year they took him to Berlin. They've not long got back, and they had a fantastic time. And it's wonderful, Tom, because he gets to spend time with his sister and Martin, who he adores, and he gets to be grown up and not be away with his mum and dad. Hooray! What's not to love?
This has literally opened his world up.
Really
Has,
amazing.
you know, and he's also we're extremely lucky to have a very supportive and beautiful wider family, and it's so nice as well to see the relationship with his cousins develop as well, and they're so supportive of him and get on board with so much with respect to Tom, and that's been amazing to see as well. It changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It does change
absolutely.
everything.
Is there an optimum age for people to start this, or is it kind of the same thought process with a lot of sort of therapies with autism, that actually early intervention is best?
Well, the one of the it's funny that you should mention early intervention, because when Tom was young and I was homeschooling, it was all about the early intervention, early intervention, early intervention. That's all you heard. So I was racing against this time frame of, what do we achieve when and how, and after which it's nothing's ever going to happen. So it's kind of interesting that Tom's biggest progress has been at the age of 23. Going back to your original question, when do we start? We start from the age of 5, basically. And spelling can look very different with a 5-year-old than it does a
Yeah.
25-year-old.
Yeah.
A 25-year-old may sit in a chair for 40 minutes. Some of them don't, absolutely not. But little ones are hard to keep. Neurotypical 5-year-olds are difficult to keep in one place at any length of time, right? So
Yeah.
for our neurodivergent non-speakers, then that's you've got even less of a chance. But there is so much you can do, and I just can't imagine how Tom's life would have been different had we started this when he was 5 years old, because there are non-speakers in the US who are attending college and university, and yeah, they're doing incredible things. And one of Tom's regrets is that he didn't get an education in that sense. He went to SEN schools, and yeah, interestingly enough, one of the things that we did find out from Tom recently was that when he was talking about schooling, I was mentioned he was in a school in Brussels, the International School of Brussels, and it was a superb school for neurotypicals, mainstream, and for those with special educational needs. But in a special educational needs setting, you're doing a lot of, well, especially when you're older, you do life skills in inverted commas, and then in your younger years, you're doing the basic stuff. But he learned a lot by listening, because he could hear the classroom next door, which happened to be mainstream. And that's where he developed a lot of information. So one of his regrets is that he's just not had that sort of academic education. But one of the things that I've found out about non-speakers is just how amazing they are at picking up from their environment. Because neurotypicals like us spend a lot of time doing this, right? Talking and waiting to talk. And more talking. But these guys, they're listening all of the time. And that's their superpower. They listen. And so they've picked up a huge amount from their environment. And so when you're thinking about how young you can start these guys and what you can expose them to at the age of 5 plus, it's amazing. Into educational material on the TV, always put the subtitles on, reading books.
Yeah.
If they walk away from you, they are still listening. We have a great phrase in Spelling to Communicate called listening doesn't have a look. And that was a bit transformative for me with Tom, actually, because now I know I can read an article to Tom and he's listening. He may not be giving me any visual sign that he's paying any attention whatsoever, but I know he's listening and I know he wants to hear it. So there is so much you can do knowing that listening doesn't have a look. You can read, and expose, provide brain food for young minds.
There'll be people listening that will be thinking, will it hinder speech using spelling? Or like, would people that are non-speaking just focus on that as a method? Or would you say that it could bring on speech as well?
Well, it's a good point that you raise, because people do worry about that kind of thing, and I'm not alone in thinking, well, if you have access to speech therapy when children are young, absolutely access and use that if you're lucky enough to have access to that, to develop that speech. Spelling is absolutely not going to thwart speech whatsoever, because if a child is going to speak, they're going to speak, and you will have times where you're trying to encourage that speech. But what spelling will do for you as a form of AAC is provide that language communication when speech can't. I wouldn't deny them that access to that. And what I would say is you are developing purposeful motor skill all of the time when you are teaching and coaching non-speakers on the board. You're always developing those motor skills, not the articulates here, but purposeful motor movement of the body, which is supportive of anything that they do. Absolutely.
And also, how does it differ from AAC?
I do consider spelling as a form of AAC, to be fair. It does differ though, and I think one of the ways it differs is we use age-appropriate, rich, sort of cognitive lessons to teach the motor skills you need to point to the letters on the letterboard, and basically to keep the spellers interested, because they're intelligent and they want to learn, basically. And as we're using those letters, we prompt the body. So we are prompting them to reach the letters that they need to get to. And the level of prompt very much depends on the motor skill they're at and the type of board that they're actually using. And those prompts are basically working towards getting the eyes and the pencil or the finger to the letter at the same time. And we're prompting them in exactly the same way that you would have been prompted to learn how to drive or to play a musical instrument. And we fade those prompts all the way back, just as you fade those prompts, and so that you can learn to drive independently. But the key with all of it is we're moving motor and cognitive demand together, so that when the non-speaker or the speller finally is able to use open communication, which means using their own words, their body, their purposeful motor movement is matching their cognitive ability, and they can move together. And that is where the key difference is, I think, with this AAC device versus any other. So there's that. And there's also the point of having a communication and regulation partner, someone who's coaching that motor and someone who's holding the boards. And we call it a communication and regulation partner, regulation being front and center, because our non-speakers, particularly our autistic non-speakers, have a lot of anxiety and a lot of impulsive and reactive motor movements. And to be able to co-regulate with somebody and bring that anxiety down means that speller is more likely to be able to access the purposeful motor they need to point to those letters on a letterboard. So it's not an AAC device where you can go, there you go, there's the device, off you go and do it.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of hard work by the speller and the CRP to work together. But the rewards aren't just finding your needs and, getting your needs and wants met. The rewards are authentic,
Mm.
uh, you know, communication of those thoughts, feelings, and opinions. And that actually is life changing. So,
And like you say, it leads on to using a keyboard, which we're all using every day for work. And I've seen some of the things that Tom's writing, and they're 3 or 4 pages long, which he's obviously used his keyboard, and he's extremely articulate and extremely intelligent. You must be so unbelievably proud of him, how far he's come.
we are proud because he's worked really hard. Yeah. So, but he's not unique. He's been given the tools to help him to access that form of AAC device. And he is the first person to say, I'm not unique. I'm the same as anybody else, and everybody can do it. It's just a question of them having access to it.
What are some of the things that he's sort of spelled out to you over recent years that has surprised you? You talked a bit there about his schooling, but is there anything else that stands out?
Oh, crikey. Well, there's schooling, there's all kinds. So, I mean, there were little things when we started on this journey, just cute things that were like, oh my God. Things like when we were on a big family holiday, Tom expressed that he wanted to have a drink. And we were like, I was like, oh my God, alcohol and autism don't mix, Tom, really, So there was a lot for me to face up to as a mum, because having to let go of some of this control, and not gatekeep for him. So but we discovered that he's very sensible and he just likes a lager. And although one night on the holiday he did experiment with a whole bunch of different drinks with his cousins, which made me nervous, but he's very, very sensible, and will be the first one to admit that alcohol and autism aren't a good blend, because it is a motor, there is a motor issue there in the base case, right?
Yeah.
Don't need to add to it. But that was just something simple. And then at a large family gathering or gathering of people, Kevin and I would flank Thomas down the end, so it would help his hearing, because he's very sensitive to noise, and we wouldn't cause an issue for everybody else at the other end of the table. But he was like, I don't want to be down the end of the table with you. I want to be in the middle of the table with all my cousins, and I want to be able to hear the banter. I miss out on all of that. And he accepts that he can't join in with that banter, but he loves to hear it, and he loves to hear them messing about and all that kind of stuff. So it's just these little simple things, And recently we discovered something interesting, and these are the discoveries you make that makes life easier for you. Spelling is hard work, but it makes life easier, and it's worth it. Thomas loves to cook. He was getting anxious and rather sort of stimmy and a bit annoyed around the time that dinner was being made, and we sort of discovered that some of his support workers Tom was on his computer or his phone, and he looked engaged. So I'll just make his dinner because it's easier if I just get on with it. But actually, it's one of Tom's favorite parts of the day is to make his dinner. It's all from fresh ingredients, and he's got his own recipe book, and he loves to cook. But he needs support, and he needs someone to shadow him to make sure he stays on task and keeps his body and his motor moving. So we discovered that if Tom's actually engaged in something and the support worker goes off and starts cooking the meal, it makes him agitated. But what he can't do, and this is part of the motor complexities that I was talking about earlier. We call it apraxia. It's a whole other era, guys. But part of this is initiation is really challenging for our non-speakers. He couldn't initiate getting his body out of the chair and moving to the kitchen and helping out. So what he's asked is that the support worker says, when the time's right, hey Tom, it's time to cook some food. Are you ready? You game? Shall we hit the kitchen, kind of thing? That's all he needed to initiate his body to move out of the chair. Yeah, and just little things like that are really helpful, aren't they? So yeah, there's some we learn from some wonderful non-speakers. There is a book written by someone called Ido Kedar. It's called Autism Land, Ido in Autism Land, and in it he speaks about the problems that non-speakers have with initiation of a skill. So he could be really cold and his sweater could be on the bed next to him, but he couldn't initiate what he needed to put the sweater on. And likewise could be boiling hot but can't initiate the motor movement he needs to take the sweater off.
Yeah.
And when you think about these sort of motor challenges that our non-speakers face, you start to understand an awful lot about the way they manage their daily lives. So yeah. So yes, we've learned an awful lot and we're still learning. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And it's life changing, because you think if spelling hadn't come into your life, how different things could have been, especially for Tom.
Oh, life has a much better outlook than it ever has, because I think when your non-speakers are young, you have so much hope for what you can support them with as they grow older. And then as they grow older, and that if that language doesn't start coming, then you start to worry, and your attitude and your focus starts to move from education to care and support in their future. And you then have all of the worry that we carry, don't we, as parents of our children, of what happens when we're not around. But this has really opened up the future for what Thomas might do in the future with his he's absolutely passionate about advocacy and seeing, spelling in schools for particularly the younger generation of non-speakers. So he has avenues for his own future, and now we have avenues of knowing how best to support him in the future. And that just changes everything. It really does change everything. It doesn't, being able to spell and communicate doesn't change their diagnosis. It doesn't change who they are. They're still not going to be able to respond when you ask them a question. That doesn't change.
Yeah.
But we're now able to find out who they are, and what their desires are, and what helps them. And that just is so different. It's such a different outlook.
I guess it gives an insight into their personality as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And Tom's, and we're just discovering Tom's quite amusing, quite sarcastic, especially to his mum. So
always.
It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, because you do get an insight into just how amazing these non-speakers, and I just love finding that out about any non-speaker that I'm working with. I just love to see their personality develop and find out what they're all about, and what their interests are, and what passions they have. And it's just so exciting. It's a privilege. It is an absolute privilege to communicate with a non-speaker.
I bet it is. And how nice of him to think about other children in schools, because Kirsty and I firsthand, and we've spoken to so many people, know how difficult it is, at the moment with schooling, and with more mainstream schools having children with additional needs, just having those things to hand and teachers being able to use them, it would be life-changing to so many, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would be. It certainly would be. And Tom is so keen to make things different for the non-speakers that are coming behind him, and for non-speakers generally. Yeah, a lot of non-speakers do become very passionate advocates, because they are actually at the forefront of what is becoming a tidal wave now of non-speakers being able to communicate via this method, which is is very exciting. And spelling should be accessible in schools. It should be, communication is a human right, and if it's your way of communicating, you should have access to it. The reality at the moment is it's not like that yet. We will get there, but it's going to take a while. But in the meantime, what Thomas is also advocating is for there are certain things that can be done by parents and carers and educators that support non-speakers. Things like presume competence, presume
Yeah.
their intelligence is there. We live by the sort of phrase called the least dangerous assumption. And that is, what's the worst that can happen? If you over-educate your non-speaker, if you give them too much brain food, and they're not actually taking it all in, what's the worst that can happen in that scenario? You've overeducated, big deal.
Yeah.
But the alternative is so much worse. What if they are in there, and I can guarantee you they are, and you're treating them as if they have an intellectual disability, you're treating them as if they're stupid, you're doing all of those things. Well, what you are creating there is great harm and trauma. You're storing up a lot of trauma for the future. So that's why we say go with the least dangerous assumption and just presume competence in your non-speaker. Think about the fact that listening doesn't have a look. That doesn't cost anything. To know that listening doesn't have a look, and that your speller can literally walk out of the door and into another room, they can probably still hear you. But just because their body is doing one thing does not mean that their brain isn't thinking another.
Yeah.
And then focusing on motor. That's another thing that schools and carers and parents can do. Is focus on the motor and break every task that's challenging for a non-speaker down.
That's really helpful. And thank you to Tom, from a mum whose child had a speech delay and my child's got limited speech, that you're pushing for change. If you're listening, thank you so much, Tom. So there are spellers and educators all around the country, aren't there? So how can people get in touch to learn more and potentially start their journey with spelling?
So a first stop for people just to start investigating actually would be to go to IASC, the International Association for Spelling as Communication, i-asc.org. You need to put the dash in. Apparently, if you don't put the dash in, you get avocado growers. So put the dash in. And that's got a ton of free resources and lessons and blogs and videos and loads of stuff on that website. So if people just wanted to explore the subject, they should go to that. Now, if people explore the subject and think, okay, this is great, this is what I want to do with my child, then you're welcome to email me and I will happily put people in touch with the sort of right practitioner for them. And my email is Watson, Watson, Joanne, Joanne, 78@gmail.com. And I'd happily answer any emails. Just put that you've come via listening to this podcast so I know where you've come from. But do that.
Oh, Jo, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've learned so much, as I'm sure so many people listening have, and so many fantastic resources that you gave there for people to learn more about it. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jo.
It's been nice meeting you both.
I've learnt so much. Thank you.